Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. How's everybody doing? Happy Mardi Gras! This is the 2025 Mardi Gras show. And as usual, I have my wingman Henry here.
Hi.
And, incredible to think another year has gone by. But here we are. Here we are. All over again. Remember, Mardi Gras is the traditional show in the Catholic Christian calendar. This was the last hurrah before Lent, which, a lot of people take that, who cares about Lent or all that. But when all these traditions started, most notable, and by the way, everybody thinks New Orleans, New Orleans. This was across the world, with Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras in Europe, and in a lot of the southern states, but and a lot of them, which of course sometimes it was an excuse for a party. Mardi Gras was a big thing. There was carnivals, just like you see now in Mardi Gras. All right, and of course this was the last hurrah before you had to buckle down. You were a Catholic, and tomorrow was Ash Wednesday, and give something up. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize that they also had a lot of parties for Easter. In other words, when the 40 days were over, that you had given up whatever, that you had to be good or all that stuff, they had parties also. It was like, yeah, Mardi Gras, but then they would, a lot of, what they call the crews, let's say for Krewes, the ones for New Orleans, that would have the big floats in the parade. Day afterwards, after Lent was over, they would have big parties. And of course, oh, and by the way, if you hear all the strange noises, like I've said in all of my other shows, I still have my birds indoors. I'm sure you can hear them somewhere in the background. Because of course, it's getting to be that time where the sun is setting. Okay, and for anybody that's had birds, chickens, and occasionally animals like dogs, okay, Trouble, by the way, Trouble is 13 or 14 years old, is missing one eye, but she's still, we call her anti-fat. But anyway, that's why they're making all that noise, besides they hear us talk. So I hope you understand. So anyway, I was, like always, I like to see, as far as the, like I said, Mardi Gras or the carnivals and all that stuff was just not a part of strictly New Orleans, which is what everybody equates it to. There was a lot of things going on in other parts of the country having to do with that celebration. The reason why I bring that up is that, like everything, people misbehaving. That, what's that saying? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, a lot of people were like, what you do on Mardi Gras stays on Mardi Gras. Not all the time. And I brought this one I'm going to show you now. This is really interesting. I had to cut it out because this was a snippet of what appeared. Do me a favor, Henry, close that door, because if not, you're going to be hearing my birds more than me. Anyway, this is a snippet of that appeared in a local newspaper. Okay, but this was well, no, I'm sorry, this was even Mardi Gras. I brought it up because I thought it was very interesting, because basically it's talks about this lady, Mrs. Fallon, who this is, of course, this is New Orleans. She lives on Phillip Street between Rousseau and Fulton, and she jumps into the river at the head of Phillip Street. All right, and they recovered her body at First Street, and of course, the coroner says it's a case of suicide. But what's really interesting about this, hold on, yep, is that remember, guys, I have an emergency bypass. Is that they determined that she jumped into or committed suicide into the river because her daughter had been victimized to an unsuspecting hour by a social vampire. You know what? And a lot of times, we always think of vampires as in Bram Stoker's, which, by the way, this story predates the Bram Stoker Dracula story by like 20 years. All right. And I was thinking a social vampire. I had never come across that. So, a lot of times, especially New Orleans, it has that Anne Rice mystique about vampires. And I'm hoping everybody that has barked, chirps, calls me, texts me, and everything is done. Okay, because it doesn't fail. Okay, have you seen everybody and their second cousin decides that they need to reach out to me? Anyway, and I apologize for that. But anyway, I brought that up because I thought that was so interesting, because this is prior to the introduction of what we think of as Dracula, the vampire vernacular, as in a social vampire. I'm sure that this is something, doesn't say here her daughter died. Okay, her daughter was victimized. It kind of leaves it vague, but it doesn't say anything in that her daughter died. It gives, I interpret it as her daughter was seduced by someone, a social vampire, or disgraced, something like that. But whatever, or maybe she died. I'm not sure. But whatever it was, it drove this lady to commit suicide. All right. And this is what I'm saying, that during those years, all these things were, I guess what we look at now through our modern eyes is not a big deal, but back then it was. Or in this case, maybe she had no recourse. Like, if her daughter was victimized, maybe it was something she couldn't undo. Who knows? But yes, I thought I'd bring that up. Now, let's go off now. This is something that happened in Selma, Alabama. Okay, this is like a short snippet also. We haven't gotten into the main stories. This is they're having their Mardi Gras celebration. This is 1868. All right. And what it reads is, one drunk woman kills another woman by shooting her 3 times in the chest, and she wounds the cab driver, who was expected not to survive. By the way, he was there, as you can tell by the little snippet, and they describe her as the bloody-minded beauty. Okay, she's got locked up in the guardhouse, and shoots the other lady 3 times in the breast, and shoots the cab driver. It doesn't clarify, was the cab driver like standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, or did he try to intervene, or did he really aim at him? All right. And they call her the frail fair one. And I think that whoever wrote this in the newspapers back in 1860, it says here, under the influence of too many whiskey toddies. Okay. Yay, Mardi Gras. All right. And I put that out there. I thought it was interesting, but everybody that thinks that all this stuff that was done was only men carousing and having a good time, no, that wasn't the case at all. So anyway, let me see. I have another little. Now, no, is that enough there was another one that I did want to mention to you. All right. Same thing. This is in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm bringing these up to show that the Mardi Gras celebrations and going on and dark deeds was not strictly New Orleans. This is in Memphis. This is 1875, February. Okay. And there's a gentleman by the name of Charles Potter. Okay. He's a butcher, and he gets arrested in Alabama. All right. For murdering, even though I guess he fled and he left Memphis and he went to Alabama, for murdering a man by the name of Joe Hyatt, age 33, on Monroe Street on the night of the carnival. He beat the man to death, and in April was sentenced to 8 years in the state pen. All right. And you might think, wow, considering that he killed somebody, beat him to death. beat him to death. I don't know the exact like if there was some history between them or why, but I guarantee you that the only reason why he got 8 years in the pen is that probably his attorney pled having that he was very drunk, almost positive, and that's why he got 8 years versus either hanging or life prison. Think about it. To actually beat someone to death, you're like, you okay? You all right? You okay?
Went the wrong way.
Went the wrong way. Uh-oh. So anyway, that tells you that that even back then, everything that went on during Mardi Gras, there was like, well, we'll make an exception because he killed that guy in Mardi Gras. That's my point. So anyway, this first story, it's very interesting. We're going back again to New Orleans, okay? It's February 1882. All right. And let me go over here. Okay. February 1882. There's Delia McGrath. All right. She marries a man named Victor Eloy. He's almost 20 years older than her. They get married on December 6, 1881 at St. Mary's Church at 1116 Chartres Street, which was part of the old Ursuline convent. Right? The couple married contrary to the wishes of his family and the bride's widowed mom. You would think, well, why? Because back then, believe it or not, even now, but back then, an age difference, especially the man being that much older, this was not unheard of. This was like not. So you would think, well, why would they object? Right now, you'll find out soon why. So they moved to a boarding house. They lived at the corner of Joseph Avenue and Chipulas. I know I'm pronouncing it. Chipulas Street, in a boarding house. All right. Now, a few weeks later, remember they marry right at the beginning of December. A few weeks later, there is no doubt that the honeymoon is over when Delia swears out an affidavit against her husband for ill treatment. And she was dead less than 2 months after her marriage. And you're thinking, well, what could have gone wrong? You would have thought they would be still a happy couple. Well, a description of the incident was later described by a witness named Marie Loretta, who testified that on February 21st, 1882, she's walking with Delia and 7 children from the Vienne family. Both of them were like nursemaids for the children. And they're walking up the street to go to what they called the Rex Procession. This is what they would call it in those years, the Mardi Gras. It was called the Rex Procession. So they're walking along with 7 children. They're walking down Magazine Street when all of a sudden Victor Eloy, Delia's husband, comes up to them between 4th and 5th Street. Now, they only recognize him when they're face to face. And for you, those of you watching the video version of this, you're going to see that I included some slides there that show the huge crowds that are at these Rex processions. All right. So in other words, it was very, very easy for somebody basically to all of a sudden you turn and they're there, because all the other times you're surrounded by crowds and crowds and crowds of people. All right. So unfortunately, and you will see why, this gentleman, the Marie Loretta, later testifies to the police that suddenly they're face to face with him. He was not masked. That's another thing, because back then people were wearing their masks, and he did not seem drunk, but appeared to be excited. And now, without warning, he slaps Delia across the left side of the face, then draws a knife from his left side, and it looked to be brand new, about 5 or 6 inches long, with a bone handle. Delia is, she's pushing the stroller along, all right? Because remember, these are 7 children that they have with them. And what she does is she lets go of the carriage and starts up the street. Marie stays with the kids, with children, and she doesn't see what happens afterwards. In other words, Delia walks off into the crowds up the street, and she's left with the 7 children. She brings them back home, and then she's told by someone in the crowd to go get Delia's mother. All right. Now, later on, the police they get another police officer testifies. His name is Henry van der Haar, that he saw Victor Eloy stab his wife several times in the back, and he arrested him. And he happens to know Victor Eloy since childhood. And Eloy says to him, Felician, you can't arrest me. You don't belong to this precinct. And he tells him, or he answers, Victor, I have to arrest you. It's my duty to do so. So here he's having this conversation with a guy who just finished killing his wife, stabbing her in the back. But he grew up with this guy and this, knows him. And he's like telling him, I have to arrest him. And the guy's like trying to basically talk himself very calmly out of it. Like, you can't arrest me because you're out of your jurisdiction or something like that. So Eloy then attempts to draw his weapon, but he doesn't. This officer Van der Haar, doesn't let him take it from his pocket, and he takes him over to the Rousseau Street police station, where Eloy said he had stabbed her and wanted to know if she was dead. So even at this point, he hasn't lost his cool. All right, he still is. I stabbed her, and I just want to know, is she dead? Like, was I successful? All right. So right there, you're going to see later on as the story develops, what was really this state of mind as far as what was going on inside his head when he did this. So anyway, here we are. They interview another police officer. His name is Richard Moore. And he says that he came across Victor Eloy at the corner of St. Mary and Britannia Streets prior to the stabbing. He says that he thinks the guy's drunk, and he tells the police officer, I'm going to go kill my wife. And he said, quote, everybody seems to be happy today, but I am not. Well, you know that wife of mine, I'm going to cut her throat the next time I meet her. And the officer tells him to go home. I'm thinking that at this point, the police officer is thinking, this guy is just crazy, crazy, crazy and drunk, and I'm going to send him home. Which, by the way, as we get further, you're going to see that this was I don't know, how's this? This was the kind of threat coming from this person that anybody, because apparently everybody, when everybody grows up in a neighborhood or an area, and you'll see why, you kind of know, if you don't know them very well, you know of people or know about them. Why, of all people, this is the one guy you would never have assumed, like, go home, that he was going to do that. You'll see what I mean. So now the coroner, he finds that the blade of the knife had penetrated Delia's left lung, causing internal hemorrhage and death. This is what killed her, a little right after. Now, fast forward, this is March of 1882. All right. Like I said, back then, things moved along very, very quickly. So, a month after the murder, all right, he's in trial, and they did, the newspapers describe him as a tall, slim, and swarthy, with a small black beard and mustache, little black eyes sunk deep into his head, and hair slightly tinged with gray. And one of the slides, for those you seeing it, you'll see an illustration that the newspapers made of him, which, by the way, illustrations being what they are, he looks kind of normal. So he admits at the trial that he bought the knife on Royal Street for the purpose of killing his wife, which clearly pointed to premeditation. So all this time, either he doesn't care what's coming his way, or he's totally out of touch that he is on trial for murder, which back then you could end up being executed. So Hippolyte Eloy, which was his brother, had met him 4 days before the murder. And Victor Eloy is speaking very well of his wife and says he loves her. Now, however, Hippolyte's wife, Euphrasie, she had visited the house the couple shared at Chenier Caminada. They had, this is another place where the family lived on February 8th. This is 3 weeks before the murder? She's saying that Victor Eloy acted very strange, and she was afraid of him. She had seen him in these spells, but never so bad as this last time. In other words, now you're getting this flavor of this guy has a history of what they call spells. All right. And she herself, who's been around him, is scared of him. All right. So then they interviewed or take testimony from Victor's sister. Her name is Emmeline de Aulnoy. She's married. So she says her brother does not have good sense. Quote, he was often perfectly out of his mind and without reason whatever. This condition was not produced by liquor, but under the influence of liquor, he was perfectly crazy. End quote. She said the family had always managed to keep Victor's condition a secret. All right. So here, this family is aware that they have a peculiar member of the family, and you'll see there's more to it than that. Well, how's this? Peculiar is one thing, eccentric is other. But they realize that the secret is that he can be violent and that he's dangerous and that there's a history to why he's that way. So, Mrs. Eloy, his mother, she used to keep a fruit and oyster stand. And Victor, that's how he made his money. He would help by opening the oysters at Cheniere Caminada, which is, this is a little island that's situated next to Grand Isle off Louisiana's coast, about 65 miles south of New Orleans, right? And what happens is, there were times when he would just walk away when they were the busiest. He would just walk away. And he would always do the contrary to what he was told. Like if they told him stand there, he'd leave. Or if they told him leave, he'd stand there. Now, it was believed Victor Eloy was illiterate. However, Delia was also, since she could only make her mark on the marriage certificate. He did sign. And the reason why I bring this up is you would think, this man, when you look at his illustration, he doesn't look like a bad-looking man, but that he's got a history of weird behavior. And then you look at her, she's illiterate. She, on her marriage certificate, all she made was an X. And then the people filling out the license, like, signed in for her next to her mark. He himself, he had crabby handwriting. He was quasi-literate, but he was able to sign. So here you have what you have. Unfortunately, nobody's there to testify if she was, who she was, besides the fact that she was totally illiterate, that she couldn't even sign her name. So, Victor's mother, her name was Odélie Jones Gallagher. She was born in 1817, and she married Paul Eloy. Now, Odélie was connected with several Creole families prominent in Louisiana history. However, her part of the family was a product of what was known as left-hand marriages, where Creole men had second families which produced mixed-race children. The family had originally come from Santo Domingo before settling in New Orleans. So, if you look at it, Odélie, she's married to Paul. Paul is considered white. And remember, back in those, they would make big distinctions about if the person was white, black, mixed race, whatever. She was considered mulatto. All right. No matter how many, if maybe she didn't, she was from that part of the family that, that Creole men had second families. Anyway, now Victor's grandmother, by the way, his father and his mother, they're saying they have no problem. However, his grandmother, was Adelaide Beaumont Le Vaudes, and she's extremely insane when she dies. She's been dead for about 20 years when this happens, but when she was alive, she wanted to kill the children who passed along the street going to school, and she had to be locked up and guarded in an asylum. And he had an uncle, John Gallagher, born 1804. This is a brother to his mom, that mimicked his mother, as in Adelaide. At times, he didn't recognize the children born in the same house with him. During the Civil War, he picked up a large number of stones and pebbles to whip the army with. And like Victor Eloy, his condition worsened when he drank liquor and he was committed to an asylum. And they mentioned there were other unnamed family members who were insane as well. And it's obvious, why the family wanted to keep his condition a secret because back then, even though they understood that insanity of this type was hereditary, all right, and it put a stigma on the family because basically it was, people understood if I marry into that family, I might have a family member that's like this. And like I said, this wasn't mental illness of the okay, let whoever it is in, because whoever I'm sorry, but the children need, just leave it open a little bit so they can come and go before I strangle one of my little dogs while I'm doing my Mardi Gras show. So anyway, the reason why they kept this a secret, which by the way, this was very common, was when you had violent insanity in your family line, you kept that like a low, you kept it low. And if anybody, I'll give an example like Jane Eyre, which was a fictional story but was based on. Mr. Rochester nobody tells him his wife comes from a long line of insane people, and then he keeps her locked away. So this was the norm back then, during the 19th century and earlier, that when you had somebody that was violently insane, you kept it hush hush because it would damage the family by extension. And also, guess what? He had a brother and sister, Hippolyte and the other sister. They were fine. Neither one of them had any signs of insanity, but Victor caught the crazy gene there. So anyway, now several witnesses knew Victor since childhood and described that at times he could not distinguish between right and wrong, and that he could remain in a corner without moving for hours. Now on March 28th, 1882, again, we're talking within a month, he's found guilty of the murder of his wife, and he's sentenced to die. Now, there's a doctor that also testifies. His name is Dr. Lemonnier, and he tells the courts that Victor had attempted to kill himself during his spells. He tried to cut himself with an oyster knife, but was stopped by someone working with him. And he was known at times to foam at the mouth. He never knew that he cut himself as an attempt at suicide. Another time he had tried to drown himself on a boat, and he had to be locked up in the cabin. Now, in other words, there were all these signs that this, and now you start understanding why the family did not want him to get married. All right. Now, the question is here. Did anyone tell Delia about this? She might have thought, I'm young, I want to get married. His family, they were not without resources. They weren't really wealthy, but they were okay. All right. So, did anybody tell her? In other words, it's not like telling her, hey, don't get married. And she's like, but why not? Well, he's a little bit strange. Yeah, but still, I want to get married. Because remember, she lives by herself with her widowed mom. Okay, her mom is an Irish immigrant. She lives by herself with her mom. It makes you wonder, did anybody really tell her how crazy this guy was? That's number one. Number two, if they did she believe him? Or if they did they really tell him how unsuitable he was because of that? Or was she I believe she was 19 years old when she was killed, 19 or 20 when she got married. Or did she say, well, I don't believe you guys. You never know. And by the way, supposedly he says one time to somebody that he was jealous of another male boarder at the boarding house where they were staying. And that he imagined, and I'm thinking she might have imagined that she was being nice to the guy. They had just married. I find that hard to believe. There's a month after they're married, she's already putting in an affidavit against him for ill treatment. So obviously that, I don't know if this poor girl found out after she got married why everybody was telling her not to, or whether she was really sorry that she did after the fact. Anyway, now what's really strange, this is a little side thing about something associated. You'll see a couple of things with this case is, all right, about 4 months after the trial, there's a man by the name of William Boulay. He's one of the jurors who who found Victor Eloy guilty of murdering his wife, he goes crazy because of his involvement with the case. Again, when I looked at that, that's weird. Why would you go crazy? Did he, I don't know, did he recognize something about Victor Eloy, about himself? But he found him guilty. That was really weird. One of the jurors 4 months later goes crazy because of his involvement in the case of being a jury person on there. Okay. Fast forward to December 1882. We're talking 9 months later. All right. It's almost like a year anniversary. They got married. His sentence, because remember, whenever, like in all states, when you were sentenced to death, you automatically were able to appeal it. So December, his sentence is confirmed by the Supreme Court, and more than anything, it's found that he's competent, because what they're trying now desperately to do is say, look, he's incompetent because he's insane. All right. Next month, January of 1883, his mother, she's a widow, she petitions the civil courts, not the criminal courts, the civil courts, to have her son interdicted, claiming his insanity dates back to his infancy and was hereditary. So in other words, what she's saying is, you know how some people will say, well, temporary insanity? This was not temporary insanity. She's saying, no, ever since he was a little boy, there's a family history of insanity. Plus, he's always been insane. He's always had some type of problem. Because obviously, and I understand, this is a mother that's trying to save her son. All right. Now, in the middle of all this, it looks like he's going to get spared the hangman's noose because he contracts smallpox in March of 1883 and he's sent to the hospital. And back then, a lot of times smallpox ended up being, you die. But no, by the end of March, he's recovered and he's returned to the parish prison. So, you know, you're thinking, hey, Victor just got off the necktie party, out of the necktie party, but no. So here, fast forward, July 11th, 1883. Now we're talking a year and a half after the murder. The governor of the state signs a warrant for Eloy's execution for August 17th. Okay, now 4 days, before days, he gets granted a reprieve until the disposition could be given to the Supreme Court. All right. A few more months pass. June 1884, his sentence is approved, as in the death sentence, and he was hung on July 25th, 1884, about 2.5 years after he's killed his wife at the Mardi Gras procession. Now, he's hung from the same gallows as another man called Kendrick Holland. Okay, he was also found guilty of murdering his wife. Now, after the execution, there's a guy that hangs out. You know. Remember, people would come to these things like a crowd thing. So there's this one man who waits till the crowds disperse. After the executions, when the bodies are cut down, all right, this guy's name is Patrick Egan. He witnesses the execution, and when they're doing this thing coming out, he gets a piece of the rope, remarking that this would bring him luck and no harm could befall him. Now, he leaves, and he starts to drink freely, and sometime that night, he starts having a word with a gentleman named George Blake. George Blake has been described as either a blacksmith or some type of engineer. What he does is he shoots and kills George Blake without warning. He just kills a guy. This guy, Patrick Egan, has some type of idea he's going to become a hero by killing anybody, this guy, and achieving martyrdom if hanged. Do you see how crazy he recognizes other crazy? You know, because that right there sounds like a crazy person. So he goes, witnesses the execution of Victor Eloy, there's been debate of his sanity, but ends up being hung. He takes a piece of the rope, supposed to bring him luck and protect him, kills somebody, and he thinks that he's going to become a hero and get martyrdom. Sounds like crazy to me with a capital C. So anyway, 5 months later, Egan is found guilty, murder, and he's sentenced to hang. Now, however, he had been active as a politician in those ward, because those are the little areas in New Orleans, but they're called wards. And in December of 1885, his sentence was changed to hard labor in the state penitentiary for the natural term of his life. After that, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he served his sentence, if he was ever paroled, if he died in prison, whatever. So, and here we come to the last part. It's November 1893, almost 10 years have passed, and there's a 16-foot storm surge, which is part of a storm that hits Grand Isle, Louisiana. One of the bodies found under the debris on Chenier Caminada was Victor Eloy's mother, Odile, and the event ended the fishing and farming community there. So yes, his poor mom ends up getting killed by a large storm surge where she had her oyster and fruit stand. And what do you think, Henry? Should this guy have hung? Or was he crazy and he should have not been hung? Or what do you think happened there that he...
It's like everything else. It's like everything else. Like women and men, they go for crazy thinking it's exciting or
I think men tend to do that more than women.
or the end all be all until crazy decides to take over. But with him, they shouldn't have waited all those years. They should have just
No, but it was too...
clipped him the first time they actually did it.
Okay.
Because it's like, okay, what are you going to gain by giving this guy a reprieve or giving him more time?
Well...
What? More time for him to kill what? The prisoners?
Well, no. Well... But no, the thing is, even now, if you automatically get an appeal, especially in a death sentence. The appeal is always, you can appeal it different ways. Maybe you don't get a death sentence, or you get life imprisonment, or maybe they find something wrong with the proceedings. The thing is always to make sure that if a person ends up getting executed, they exhausted everything that could be done to make sure that this person got a fair trial. And of course, his mother, remember, along the way, his mother is trying really, really hard to prove that her son is not just temporarily insane. Like some people would say, I went crazy and killed her. That he had a history of insanity.
Just remember one thing, you can't fix crazy.
No, I know that.
And then they let him go thinking, then he kills more people and then more people.
Well, this is the thing. And I think, see, his crazy, he got away with crazy for like almost 40 years because he was almost 40 years old when this happened. Because as far as we know, he hadn't killed anybody. Here this guy's trying to kill himself, throwing himself off a boat, cutting himself with an oyster knife. And that we know of because, let's go down the rabbit hole. Could he have killed somebody and his parent, his family said, somebody that nobody knew, like, shh, don't.
Just remember, one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Okay.
Okay. A lot of people pretend to be crazy because if you end up it changes, you end up in the hospital or you end up in prison. Crazy sometimes has its rewards.
Well, no. This guy, to be honest with you, when his mom, and I understand, she's trying to save her son. I don't think she was looking to spare him not going to prison. I think she was trying to spare him from getting hung. But if you look at the thing where there's, because remember, at those times, these policemen would walk around. They were like the equivalent of beat cops. They were familiar with him. They knew he had crazy and crazier days. So they knew he was not, in other words, this thing of her trying to say, my son is crazy and has been crazy and he has a family. This was not a difficult thing to prove. All right. The thing that they also always came down to was that he was competent. In other words, he was crazy, but he was competent as in he knew the difference between right and wrong. And what they said 4 days before, he's telling his brother, everything is wonderful and I love my wife so much. So, she's this poor girl. And again, it makes you wonder, did he wait until the Mardi Gras parade, the Rex parade? Because see, she had already filed the equivalent of an affidavit, I imagine, which would be the equivalent of protection, an injunction in, modern day.
See,
but that's not going to do much for her. Obviously, it didn't.
See, but he could have been killing tons of people over 40 years, and she was protecting him. There was a guy like that in Jersey, that he was crazy. They call him Pepe Bicicleta, like Pepe Bicycle, because that's all he rode was a bicycle. and they say he killed his wife and stuff, and
But who would say that who said that he killed his wife? What, the neighborhood or what?
yeah, the neighborhood, and yeah, so
But let me ask you, okay, but see, sometimes people say stuff, but one thing is to say it, and people say, "Wow, that's just talk." Because let's face it, you start saying that somebody killed somebody, it's like, so what happened? What was the rest of the story?
um, he was always riding a bicycle with a machete in the back of
That's not
in
good.
his bicycle. But the thing about it is, people associated the fact that he did a little bit of that he did garden work for people. That he would cut.
Oh, okay, okay, like a
the
gardener,
stuff.
like a
So
landscaper,
he would actually do that every now and then,
right?
and he wasn't like jumping up and down, drooling and stuff. You would talk to him, and he would just be a normal guy. But then, but like we found out behind the scenes that when he finally got arrested because he got into an argument with another old man and
Right.
stabbed him with a machete
Okay.
and cut the guy's whole arm off. And they took it when he was in the hospital. They found his family, they found his brother and stuff, and they said that he went crazy after he caught his wife cheating on him, and he chopped up his wife and threw her to a wood chipper.
Okay.
And he went crazy. They said that that's what made him crazy. He just started going crazy after that. Didn't trust nobody, and then he said just. But they could never find any actual bodies. But his brother said that he was doing that since the early 70s.
Killing people?
Yeah.
But what? Just because he imagined that they had done or something?
No, to him, they cheated on his wife. His wife, they had an affair with his wife.
Okay, I understand. So the once he did away with his wife, then he went after the people that were with his wife, whether they were or not.
Yeah, whether they were or not. If they knew her, they slept with her.
Holy crap!
And they had to go. and
what-
believe it or not, he was a spry little guy. He looked like he must have weighed like about 140 pounds. He looked like they had to put weights in his legs because or he will fly away. When he actually did that, he was 72 years old.
This last one, the one that he killed,
When he actually got a fight with another old man that was doing landscaping also, they got into an argument, a fight. I guess it was over like a job that he was gonna do, and they just went crazy, and they started fighting. He hit that other guy, hit him with a bicycle, and he took out his machete and hacked him.
well, he's just thinking it's worked for me so far. Why
And
not?
nobody would think that a little old man will be harmless. That little old man.
Oh no, I mean not harmless, but like
No. You look at a little old man.
yeah, it's the guy on the machete with a machete on the bike, but that's okay. He does landscaping.
He just does landscaping. He's 70 something years old, harmless. It's like he's skinny as a rail. Nobody. Let me tell you.
Can you imagine those people that had customers? They must have been like, "What?"
No. Believe it or not, he did work for my mom. He was always very polite. He would go, Melba, what do you need? And my mom would tell him, I need to cut some of these branches that are going over my fence. He would go. My mom would give him $50, and he would be a happy camper. And then he would shake her hand, take the money, and sometimes he would do a little bit extra for free. And my mom was actually surprised when they told her. They go, Pepe's in the hospital, and he killed all this bunch of people. And my mom said, nah, not him. He's Pepe.
Pepe the landscaper.
Yeah. She actually stood up for him. He goes, it's Pepe. You guys are just believing rumors. Nothing. That guy's just a harmless little old man.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I think this guy, as weird and as how's this? When you read about this guy, Victor Ilouan, you always get the impression that everybody around him, including his immediate family, knew he could be violent. They saw enough about him, like he had these spells and that he would sit in other words, they were seeing things about him, but it was like, well, we'll manage him. And again, was this murder the first one he ever did? Did he ever do something in his family? And I don't know, maybe not. Maybe his family wouldn't have. Or did the family, maybe he had done stuff where nobody knew about it and they like threw the body in the bayou? I'm just making stuff up, but I'm just saying, yeah. And so poor Delia and short-lived, again, Mardi Gras. I'm telling you, dark deeds on Mardi Gras. All right, next story. Next story, I think it was really unusual. All right. And you'll see what I mean. All right. This takes place in Oakland, California, March 20th of 1926. All right. And there's a guy named Macario Timon. He's 58 years old. Okay. And he's known, what he does supposedly is he raises goats. All right. And he's found with his throat cut inside his home. And everything is inside the home is turned upside down. Now, first, the police are thinking that this crime is tied to the whereabouts of a mysterious gold mine or some type of mine that he was looking for. In other words, that this guy would raise goats, but on the side, he was one of these treasure hunters going out there, supposedly trying to find some type of mine. Now, they find this map showing the location of a mine under a seal on a photograph holder. And 4 months before he dies, Macario, that's his first name, he submits a sample of ore to a chemist for assay with a result of 41 cents to the ton. I have no idea what that means in assay language, but later on you'll see what I mean. So in other words, whatever anybody believed, and then he's taking, samples to an assayer, it's pointing that this guy is out there trying to find something. So his neighbor is a lady called Mrs. Garcia. She's the one that finds the body in the hall of the house. All right. Now, the authorities also find a razor with the blade missing and a blackjack. All right. Now, the blow on his head tore the leather cover and lead shot from the blackjack, and the slashing of his throat broke the razor. What does that tell you? Whoever killed this man did it hard. All right. This was not like by mistake I hit you. No, it was savage. For lack of a better word, I don't know if it was, I want to make sure you're dead versus I've got something personal against you, whatever it was. And by the way, part of it is they find his body in the hallway next to an altar. But we're not there yet as far as where this is going to lead. So, in the living room, all right, they find, like I said, the room is turned upside down. Glasses are broken wine bottles all over the place. The furniture's overturned. And they don't know, was this a fight or was whoever was in there was looking for something. And they find a footprint in the doorway leading from the hall where the body's found. And then bloodstains on two of the doorknobs in the house. Right? Now, the police, they question Mrs. Garcia, who found him. But she's released once they realize that she's not involved in this crime. Now, during this time, after Mrs. Garcia, later on they compare notes. When she finds the body and goes off to call the police, the coroner's office receives an anonymous telephone call telling them that there's a dead man at the 3rd Street address. Makes you wonder, like, obviously, who knows about this? Are they trying to pin it on somebody else? Was this a good Samaritan that maybe heard something but didn't want to get involved? All right. But they never find out, by the way, who this person is. Now, Macario's neighbors, they knew very little about him. And they considered him a recluse. But they also thought of him as a mining man. Like I said, a mining man who raises goats. Now, the last time he was seen was on March 18th, on a Tuesday, March 18th at about 3 p.m., accompanied by what they called a stout woman. March 18th is 2 days before they discover his body. So at least, and the identity of this so-called stout woman is never known. Nobody can ever, and see, later on you realize, is it unknown or is the people that are, well, everybody shuts up and doesn't say anything. So they go to the assayer, which is a guy named Walter Gibson, and they ask him, look, what about the sample he brought? Because they're trying to figure out a motive for this crime. And he's telling them that what he bought, they were no richer than could be dug out of any backyard. All right? So in other words, that this idea that this guy had found a mine that had, and by the way, it didn't have to be gold. There's a lot of other minerals that, there was nothing there worthy of murder. Like he didn't find this rich vein or whatever, because the assayer's confirming it. Hey, it doesn't have any real worth. It's like if you brought me some dirt from your backyard. All right. Now, a day later, there's another motive that's come up for the murder. All right. Now, it seems that this guy, Macario Timon, he's in the midst of some type of bootlegging feud, supposedly. And men and women were known to come to his house at all hours of the night, and they find 2 barrels of wine in the basement, because remember, the prohibition's going on at this time. So what he's doing is he's fermenting, I guess, his own wine, and you'll see, because he's originally from Spain. So they find 2 barrels of wine in the basement. So he has people coming over there, and he's not selling liquor, he's selling wine. But when everything is dry, So now they're thinking, okay, this was a bootlegging, I don't know, crime gone wrong. Did somebody want 2 barrels of wine? Or what happened? So now they forget the mine thing. They're thinking, okay, this is a bootlegging problem. Right? So there's a detective called Richard McSorley, and he goes into the basement and he finds several excavations about 2 or 3 feet deep in the cellar. Now, he's thinking that what Timon was doing was he was burying money made from the wine he sold. Because number one, there was no bank book in the house, and there was no cash. All right. And or he thought somebody that knew what he was doing, like with robbery, believed that he kept cash on hand from all his transactions. Because apparently this guy had a steady supply of men and women coming at all hours of the night to buy wine. So now this is the story. This is the backstory of Timon before he gets here. Of, Macario Timon. What an unusual name. He's come to Oakland from Honolulu in 1919. All right. So we're talking here 7 years before. And back in Honolulu, he leaves behind a wife that he divorced. Her name is Ascension, and several children. But they contact Honolulu. They're like, well, maybe there's a reason in Honolulu. They can't find anything, a tie-in from Honolulu as to shedding any light on the crime. They interview one of his daughters. Her name is Florencia Celestina. By the way, some of his kids are already adults. And she tells them that this family had been living in Hawaii for the past 13 years. They had settled there in 1913 after leaving Spain. And while Macario had lived in Honolulu, he worked as a laborer and he owned a small farm. And she tells police, hey, my parents got divorced 7 years before. And that after he left Hawaii, they had known very little of his movements or his whereabouts. And that she had never heard that he had any interest in mining. So in other words, this man leaves. 7 years later, his family knows very little about him or what he's doing. I think they know that he's in Oakland, but and plus he's never known to have interested in mining, right? So then a few days later, evidence is presented that this society of devil worshippers were in some way responsible for this guy's death. Inside his house, the police find a Kabbalistic books and documents. One of them was a ritual written in Latin. There's also a letter addressed to Lucifer, signed by this Macario Timon, in which he's asking for aid in realizing certain unnamed ambitions, and it's written in a fluid that may have been blood. So in other words, he's saying, I want this, I want that, but he doesn't specify what he wants. He's just telling in the letter, give me what I ask for, that kind of deal. Now, despite everything, Timon has his own attorney. Is a name by the name of James Galliano. All right. So he's telling the police, he tells the police his theory that his client was a leader in what's called the Satanic Order of Lucifer, and they were believed to practice human sacrifice. Now, papers are found in the bedroom of the house, which were linked to the satanic order, which was believed to be an outgrowth of the devil-worshipping religion of Yazidis, which flourished in southern and western Asia before the birth of Christ. And there were also sects in Mexico and in other parts of the United States. Now, they find a book because, remember, everything, all the material that Macario Timon has are in Spanish. All right? So they find a book there called El Libro Infernal, which translates to the Infernal Book. And in it, it describes how members of the order inscribe their name on its records using their own blood for the signatures. And that other customs in the book are blood sacrifices. Now, they do a coroner's inquest a couple of days later. This is March 24th, 1926. They find that robbery is not the motive, but that Timon, in all probability, was marked for death because of some infraction of the rules of a secret society. So at this point at the corners, they're thinking, this guy, forget bootlegging, forget robbery, forget, all the normal stuff. He was targeted as part of a secret society for some reason. So now the police start searching for what was described as a richly dressed woman in black satin who was seen prowling around his home, which was at 1165 3rd Street in Oakland. She's believed to be what they called a sub-priestess of the cult. Number one, she's dressed differently from the bootleg patrons who come to sample Timon's wines. And I guess this must have come from neighbors. They say that every time she comes, they see her reconnoiter the house every time before she goes in, and would wait until other guests had left. And she would stay for hours at a time. In other words, she doesn't go there when there's anybody else there. Before she enters, she goes all around scoping it out, making sure nobody's around. And then when she does go there, she stays for hours. So that's why they're assuming that this lady is part of this cult. Now, they're thinking that this murder may have been performed in accordance with ritual. Now, Inspector Thomas Woods says that the reason why he thinks that this was part of the ritual was that none of the money on his person was taken. And among his writings was the indication he had been hunting what was called, quote unquote, a satanic stone, said to have the power of enabling the owner to win riches and confound his enemies. So now they're thinking, okay, this guy's supposed interest in mining was not mining as in silver, gold, or anything that normally people would mine for. He's supposedly looking for this satanic stone that, that supposedly is going to give him everything he wants. Now, they also find in his house a little square sheet of yellow paper on which is drawn a design of a rising sun behind some hills. There's a tree and a cross accompanied by mystic symbols that provide a clue which the police hope are going to lead to the killer. Because at this point, none of the policemen really understand any of this occult symbolism. They know it's occult or weird, but they don't understand what it means. So they think that this drawing, which was found in a folder, which contained the key and scroll talisman of the devil worship cult, would lead to the culprit. So they're trying to track down who has something like this. Now, when they're going through his basement, they find another strange letter he had written in Spanish, which translates to the following. Quote, "Most powerful Lucifer, I ask you to present yourself to my prayer and lend me your mouth of wisdom and knowledge, so I may discover the occult sciences to gain advantage over and do damage to my enemies. And I shall recognize you as my Lord and Sovereign if you put me in possession of this eerie art, so that I may have the gratification of whatever I desire. And for that I subscribe my name with the blood of my veins." This is that letter that they say that they think that it's in red and it's his blood. Now, they find also part of this altar is they find the drying hide, a leg of one of his goats, which they believe was killed as a sacrifice. And this is found in the hut where he lives, which had been made into an altar. Now, police also find hidden under his clothing books on black magic, hypnosis, and magnetism. And Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Astaroth were uppermost in Timon's or Timon Macario's blood inscribed prayers. So he would do these prayers and sign them in his blood at the end. He was serious about this. In enters this gentleman called Dr. David Prescott Barrows. He's the former president of the University of California. He weighs in on the crime. Now, he compares this to a murder committed only 3 months before, on November 4th, 1924, to a young woman named Rubia Gonzalez. She's killed at Nogales in northern Sonora. She had become involved with a witch doctor known as the Marquise de Sade. She's found that in his room, which were filled with the hides of animals, strange potions, and herbs that were designed to turn humans into snakes and birds. So at this point, remember, this is California, they're thinking, are we talking the same group of people, the same group, or are they just both occult groups but different leaders? They're not sure. They contact this other man. His name is Leocadio Camisón. He's named as one of the executors of Timon's estate and guardian of his minor son. He's telling him, I don't know anything about anything. Now, Camisón tells them that he had known Timon when he lived in Hawaii, and that when he was in Hawaii, he was a deeply religious man, but that suddenly he severs his connection to the Catholic Church for no apparent reason and started to becoming mysterious in his ways. His friends believe his loss of faith was connected to trouble with his wife. When after the separation, he tried to bring the children to Oakland to live with him, however, their mother was not in agreement. And you'll see later on a little bit of an inkling of why that might have happened. Now, there's two inspectors, police inspector, Tom Woods and Tom Gallagher. And they're saying that a year before, there had been an attempt on Timon's life when gas in his home was turned on while he slept. And other occupants woke him up, since on occasion he would take in boarders. And that's the only thing that saved him. Because remember, back then, some people were still using gas. Now, it's believed that he had become into possession of the so-called magic stone, which is called a piedra imán, which translates into magnetic stone, and that it resembled some type of white opaque quartz, and it was found in a satin-lined wooden box among his things. Maybe this was what he was digging for. Who knows? His attorney, in the midst of all this investigation, his attorney tells the police that Timon had sent several letters to a lady in Cuba named Juana Fernandez. He thinks that she's tied into some type of voodoo religion. And the last letter that Timon had sent her is returned back with a stamp on it, barred from Cuban mails on the ground of fraud. And he believes this was the woman seen skulking around Timon's house. We don't know. Did this lady come all the way from Cuba, skulking? Whatever it was, she was, even back then, in 1926, the Cuban government, she had, I guess, been involved in some type of fraud, so much so that even her mail was not being delivered to her, or at that address. Now they're even looking at his goat raising farm. Since in the infernal book, which is what he kept, the infernal, quote, the infernal goat, the diabolical cat, the black hand, and the black spirit were the Emperor Lucifer's personal representatives on earth. So the police are even up in the air. Was this guy raising goats just for income? Or was there something, was this an ends to a means to an end as far as this occult, whatever he was doing? Now, the detectives found evidence of allied organizations of worshipers in the United States, Mexico, and in Cuba. Now, this is really interesting. I found this out, and you always hear about it, but during the early 20th century, correspondence courses, especially those with occult teachings, became very popular, especially in California. A person could advertise a new system of achieving hidden knowledge of reality in magazines, and the interested parties would pay for a step-by-step educational course by mail. Now, the lessons would be mailed, and then a test at the end of the chapter. Once finished with a system, which would take from 25 to 75 letters, graduation was achieved, and now this person could open a local lodge. All right. Now, was this what he had going on with this lady in Cuba? Was she sending him instructions so that he could open his own thing? They never do find out about that. Now, The police end up going to the mining camps near the Nevada border while leaders of the secret occult are sought in the Bay District. The police are all over the place trying to run down somebody that's going to really give them a good lead, because right now what everybody is doing is giving them vague answers, either I don't know, or yeah, or things, insights about his life, like his attorney, but nobody's giving them concrete information as in names, the person. Yeah, we see a woman dressed in black satin skulking around his house. Wow, that could be anybody. All right, that she didn't act like the a bootlegger coming to pick up his wine. No, that she stayed there hours. Maybe she was that lady Juana who was coming, stays there for hours, instructing him. All right. So here we go with. Let's keep going with. See, fine. What happens to Timon? So now the clues are starting to point to what they call a love triangle involving Mrs. Garcia, the neighbor that found him dead. All right, her husband, Gregorio Garcia, and a woman named Dolores Alvarez Trujillo. Now, it's another of the Garcias that actually secured a divorce, but Mr. Garcia left with Dolores to Sunnyvale, California. He just leaves his wife, goes off with Dolores, and he went to work in the mines, and she worked at a cannery. So the police go up there looking for him because apparently they're thinking, we're looking for anybody to give us a heads up. So when the police go up to Sunnyvale, they find this lady, Dolores Trujillo. She tells them Garcia had been with her till a month ago, and then he had left and she hadn't heard from him since. So he's left his wife, goes off with Dolores. They go to Sunnyvale a month before, coincidentally, that this guy's killed. He up and disappears. At least this is what she's telling police. And she doesn't know, hasn't heard from him since. Doesn't know where he's at, none of the above. Now, the police find out that he, the victim, Timon, was known to have a, quote, bitter dislike of Mrs. Trujillo, even though the police were not sure why he had this enmity towards her. Did she know more than she said? And more importantly, did Mr. Garcia's absence mean he had some involvement in Macario's death? So we keep going. They question another people. Her name is Ana Martinez. Her husband is Esteban Suelas. They're questioned. When it's found one of the letters Timon has sent to Cuba for a charm, asked for a reply to be sent in their care. Another mystery. Why doesn't he ask for it to be sent back to him? Why is he telling them, send it to this address? Unless he's thinking, what I'm thinking is, that whoever was in Cuba was not sending him back anything. So he was thinking, I'll put in somebody else's name and see if they respond. Like, is it me or is it this person? So they ask him and they don't know anything. So then police find what they call devil worship literature in the home of Felix Dominguez while he was being investigated for burglary. So here's this guy. And they're searching, I guess, his house for burglary, and they find literature having to do with devil worship. However, he tells police he's illiterate, and he doesn't know who he had gotten a devil's dictionary found in his possession. So I'm illiterate. I don't know how, and I have no idea how that devil's dictionary got into my things. See what I mean? That they're going round and round, and they cannot get any firm indicator where to go with this. Now, they find another letter among Timon's belongings, directed to this lady Juana Fernandez, Cuba, and dated 1924, 2 years before. And in it, he says, I hope that upon you receiving these short words that you find yourself well with your family. Well, I am well. This is to tell you that I've sent you 4 letters asking you for the infernal laws. Or is it of the Emperor Lucifer that makes the number 37 in the catalog? See if you understand it. I sent that signature the 11th of March by registered mail, and they sent me a little card that you have received it. With this, I tell you to put all your faith in me as I have it in you. And I also tell you that I have had no fear whatsoever of the talisman, putting all of my faith in the piedra imán, which is the magnetic stone. And because of this, I tell you that you put all your faith in the infernal book. Or is it the laws of the Emperor Lucifer and his minister, which is the number 37 of the catalog? and you look well into the secrets that I have. Some person that is doing me evil. Doing that, you put yourself in all my operations, and without more for today, receive the tender affection of your brother who is Macario Timon. So it tells you this guy is got a catalog from this lady. He's ordering things and he's asking her question. All right. It sounds like he's thinking somebody's trying to do him like the evil eye kind of deal, like somebody's out to get me, somebody's gunning for me. And it sounds almost a little bit either asked her or he's paying her, because I doubt she's going to do any of this for free. I want you to look and tell me who's doing something against me. And like all of these things, it's like, oh, wait a minute. I know somebody's trying to curse you or do you harm, but you need this thing to make sure that they don't do that to you. So somewhere along this line, I think that, again, this might have nothing to do with the other. Him sending these letters to his lady in Cuba and her sending back the letters, and boy, they're little chatterboxes, aren't they? Close the door, Henry. We might get lucky and they might shut up. So anyway, we really don't know at this point if one thing has anything to do with the other. This might have nothing. Him sending correspondence courses with a lady Juana in Cuba that may have defrauded him or taken his money and then left him hanging after he bought all his stuff. Maybe one thing had nothing to do with the other. We'll see. So, now the police are saying that the devil worshipper were divided into three classes. First, there was the Imperial Trinity, over which Lucifer rules as emperor, aided by Beelzebub, chief and Astaroth, duke. Next, there's a group of 8 persons named as follows: Lucifer, prime minister; Satanas, general in chief; Agalaret, or something, general; Francella, lieutenant general; Sargantanas, brigadier general; and Neberon, aide de camp. A third group contained 20 spirits, and they are not of the alcoholic type. That's funny. But are flesh and blood creatures. Satan is well down the list in this group and is just but a minor official in the realm of devils. All right, so that tells me that they found enough material in Macario's house that this was not just letters to and from. He was deep, earlobe deep in this. All right. Now, authorities by now are starting to revise their original premise, believing that Macario was sacrificed like a goat, motivated perhaps by refusing to pay any more money to his tutors. His attorney theorized that Timon wrote his name in his own blood on the rolls, which we know that, because later on they send a blood sample to a laboratory that proved the statement written in 2 of the books reads, "Signed in my own blood," was true. It wasn't red ink, in other words. One of the books that was found, called The Secrets of King Solomon, because remember, King Solomon was supposedly able to call forth demons and keep them in check, in other words, described the following spell, quote, "First you must catch a black hen." I don't think this was King Solomon's, but who knows? In other words, the book ascribes this spell to King Solomon. How's that? Quote, "First you must catch a black hen, one that has never laid an egg. Catch it with care so that it does not cry out. To do this, catch it at 2 o'clock in the morning. Take it to the center of crossroads that form a perfect cross, and there with a wand of cypress draw a mystic circle. This done, place the hen in the center and cut its body in 2 parts, pronouncing these words: Elohim esain fingatoris estiratis perpendu salari." I have no idea what those means. Then, after turning the face to the east and blowing, recite the curse of the great spirit Adonai, and you may confront the spirit immediately. Now, end quote. And this is a description of a goat sacrifice. Quote, "Buy a little goat and cut its throat at midnight, pronouncing these Kabbalistic words: Abumalis ieds ambluet fortiduni ab ilias. Then cut the skin in little pieces, reserving 1 piece in 4, around which in blood you must write the magic words, Toratus Curiostaratis. These words must be written in the blood of a newborn kid. Then put a piece of the skin in a white silk bag and hang it about your neck. Go then to the church and for 24 hours meditate on the difficulties you must overcome. In this way you will get your desire." End quote. which is, it's funny because these prayers are invoking Satan and the devil, but in one of the instructions is telling you, go and meditate in church. So it's, you see that a lot in a lot of these where they overlay the, beliefs in the Catholic Church with the, but I don't know. It was like, okay, I don't know. You would think that after doing that spell, you would start smoking and hissing on the way into the church. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, by September, this is September 1926. So we're talking here, March, April, May. We're like 4 or 5 months later. The police now are trying to find out the identity of the chiefs of the cult in Havana. And this leads to a dead end. But let's go back. And they started looking, well, this is part of this, they didn't look so much into this, but this has had a mysterious past to begin with, all right? He's born in Spain in 1867 at San Pedro, Extremadura in Spain. Now, his birth name is Macario Simón Jerónimo. Because remember, in Spanish countries, you take your mother's surname as well. So his father's name was Martin Simón, or Simon, and his mother was Maria Geronimo. Macario Simon Jerónimo, which is his real birth name, he marries Maria Ascensión Davila Álvarez. Same thing, she keeps her mother's surname. They have their first son, Sandalio, which in the birth certificate is Sandalio Jerónimo Davila. His father's last name, Jerónimo. His mother's last name, Davila. And they marry in 1890. They have their first son in 1897. Right? Pretty soon they have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children in total. Starting with Sandalio in 1897, and the last child was born in 1910. Right? Now, for some reason, after 1907, Macario starts to change his name. He drops, instead of Simon on his father's last name, he starts using Timon, T with a T. In other words, he substitutes the S for T. So it's Timon instead of Simon or Simon. Why he does this, it's unknown. Why this is his family name. All his children on their birth, they're registered under that name. He decides to change it. So 3 years later, in 1313, the family immigrates to Hawaii. Now, during their oldest trip, their oldest son, Sandali, dies from meningitis. Now, what we know so far is that in 1919 is when everything changes for him. He leaves for California. His friend says that he was deeply religious. All of a sudden, he's become mysterious, severs all ties to the church. One thing we know is something happened in 1919 with his marriage. What we do know is his wife had to have divorced him because she marries in 1919. On November 20th, 1919, she marries another man named Antonio Lara, who's 10 years younger than her. Was she unfaithful to him? Maybe he was, but he wanted to take his kids with him to California. We don't know. Because by then, also, not all his children were minor children. Some of his older children were already adults. So, but his wife they get divorced. His wife remarries in 1919. He leaves for California. And this is also when he starts getting into all this very unusual cult stuff and cuts ties and becomes very secretive. All right. Now, but it's really weird though. 1926, Timon is dead. He's killed, whatever. 2 years later, his ex-wife, she's left Hawaii and she comes and she's living there with Oakland with her husband, and he's running a shoe shop. Interesting. And ultimately, what's really weird is she dies in 1942 and she gets buried next to Macario. So in other words, even though they had divorced like 23 years earlier, she's buried next to him in that graveyard in Oakland. And as to who killed Macario, or even more importantly, why, nobody knows. It was never solved. I'm sure it had to do with, if you're thinking that it's a cult and it's out of the country, that makes it more difficult. I'm sure that if there were people around there that they were afraid, they were like, man, I'm going to put some juju's going to be put on me. same thing if it was tied to the bootlegging, which is doubtful. It sounds more like he was bootlegging, not to bootleggers. He was selling wine to like, hey, I want a bottle of wine. I'm going by there. It doesn't sound like he was like one of these. I'm running a big operation. He had 2 barrels of wine. So, what do you think? What do you think? Why do you think he was killed? Was he just wrong place, wrong time?
That's not that difficult. Most likely, he wasn't paying his dues to those people.
You mean the cult? The cult?
Yeah, and most of these cults, they have chapters and play all over the world, and all they need to do is send a telegram or send something to wherever he was, and they were going to find him. Yeah, it's like once you get into that kind of stuff, you better be prepared for the consequences.
Well, I started thinking about that, and I'm thinking, okay, this guy is, you could tell, he was the only thing I could think of. Because really, at the end of the day, this lady, let's say the cult was over there in Cuba. I'm just thinking. The only thing I can think of is that he's sending her money and she's sending him back little lessons and, I interpret whatever. And there comes a point where I think Timon gets tired of sending her money. And at some point, maybe they have. In other words, he's been feed a line, get the magnetic stone, and do this and do that, and you'll get whatever you desire.
And he's probably thinking, okay, when is this crap gonna work?
And by the way, for all we know, because remember, he never says exactly what he wants. For all we know, maybe what he wanted back with his wife, and he didn't get it. That's just me assuming a lot. But anyway, since the police says he never says exactly he just says what I desire. But maybe we're a few years late to it, and Macario says, enough of this. I'm not sending you any money. And then he gets a letter back saying, hey, this mail, this address is fraud, connected to fraud in Cuba. And the only thing I can think of is he knew somebody that either he said something like, oh, you better either give me my money back or you better come through for me, because if not, I'm going to talk about who I know is involved in this. That's the only thing I can think of. That there were other people that were in this group with him. I'm not saying that we're higher than him, but we're in it, and we're like...
See, the problem with that is that you could try to be tough. You could try to act like you're some kind of a badass. But when these people have been doing this stuff forever, they're not... see, you could pretend, but they're not pretending.
But you have to understand that also at the same time... remember, if there's other people that are in this cult with him, whatever their belief systems, and he's saying, well, I'm going to say, blah, 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 blah. Maybe, he's just, there's people there that might have said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And somebody decides, you know what? And you know what? That maybe this guy, the same way he went whole hog on the occult stuff, all of a sudden he realizes at some point, maybe, who knows, that they're just stringing him along. And maybe they said, okay, we'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We will we'll shut him up by killing him, and we'll make him a sacrifice. And by the way, that thing of where they empty his pockets out, but they don't take the money. But they do note that is a sign of ritual sacrifice. And as a matter of fact, there was a murder committed. As a matter of fact, in that same time period in England, where they did exactly that, where they slashed the guy's throat, and he was working with a gardener, and they took one of a pitchfork and they pinned him to the ground. And one of the things that they did was they emptied out his pockets. But they did not take any of his things, any of his money. So again, was this just, and it'll come to me, God, I hate it when I can't remember the name of the oh shoot. And as a matter of fact, they even sent somebody from that murder in England. They sent somebody from a detective from Scotland Yard, and after he ran around and the Valentine's Day ritual murder, there we go. After he ran around and he started interviewing the people in this little village in England, all right. No, I'm sorry. It was in 1945. The Charles Walton was the name of the victim. The inspector, both the local policeman and the one that they sent from Scotland Yard, both believed that it was ritual murder, that he was sacrificed. So yeah, so that's not far fetched. So if you ever look it up, the murder of Charles Walton in 1945 in the UK. So you think what? You think it was he just
remember.
I don't think he was killed over.
A lot of these people that belong to those cults have prominent jobs. They have positions, which could be compromised if they find out that they're in this.
Yeah, and I also think sometimes, you know what? And I don't think you have to be that important if you don't want anybody to know that you're involved in this. It just might ruin your, even that. Let's say you're a middle class person. It just kind of, what if you have a business that if it became known, you're running off and you're into occult and satanic stuff, it's gonna ruin your business altogether.
If you have a clean image that people are used to seeing you, and you have to live around in that town or in that state around these people, your life is pretty much over.
What I'm saying is, but you don't have to be really that important. Sometimes if you have a small business and you, like you said, you have this, you're known in the town for, hey, that's a great, he has his general store. This is just me. And it comes out, that'd be the end of your store.
That's your ultra life, and
right, and that's what I'm saying. That's the end of you making money. Sometimes that could be a very good motive for murder, guys. And by the way, you may get a sacrifice while you're at it.
And at that time, they'll probably run you out of town.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Now, this next, and I started thinking about this thing that they were saying that in the 1920s, the cults, there was a surge of cults throughout the United States, especially California. And then I remembered something. There's a book that I wrote back in 2021 called Film Noir Murders, all right? And I remember a story there. I'm going to share it with you because it's absolutely right. And I didn't realize that some of this could overlap into, that there were, in other words, when you say a cult, they could be cults. Sometimes they overlap in their belief systems, and other times they're just totally different. But it's that same cult behavior and teachings and, getting people to go along and do what you want, or what the leader wants. Okay, now this takes place in Los Angeles. Okay, this is LA, 1929, and it's October 7th, and the newspapers write about the discovery of the body of a girl named Willa Rhodes. She's 16 years old. And the newspapers are saying that they considered her a high priestess of a strange cult in LA. And how they get to this conclusion is they find a sealed cedar casket underneath the floor of her foster parents' home that's located in Venice. Now, the police unearthed a pit measuring 4 feet square by 6 feet deep, and is saturated with seawater. Apparently, wherever they were at, they were close to the beach. Inside the coffin, this girl's she's in there with knees drawn up to her chest and her hands crossed. Now, they start having this suspicion that she's sacrificed as part of a ritual. Next to the girl's casket, there's another box that contains 7 dead puppies. Now, later on, as the police start investigating this, they find out that each of the puppies represents the 7 tones of Gabriel's trumpet, which would hail this girl's resurrection. Now, the Rhodes, the Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, they had adopted Willa in Portland, Oregon, when she was 2 years old. Now, they told police she died on New Year's Day, 1925. We're talking here 4 years before, from an ulcerated tooth. And that they had preserved her in ice and spices for a year, hoping to resurrect her through the cult's power. They admitted that they had not called a doctor to attend the dying girl. Now, they take the body to the medical examiners, and they failed to produce proof that she met a violent end. But the police still suspect that she did not die of natural causes. Right now, how this whole debacle came around was, there's a guy named Clifford Dabney. He's a wealthy oil operator from the area, and he files a complaint of grand theft against the leader of the group. Right? Police brings in a woman named Reverend May Otis Blackburn, aka Her Heavenly Highness Queen May, and her daughter Ruth Wyland Rizzio. Now, Dabney, after he places a complaint, he asks the police for protection, saying his life is in danger once he exposed them. So he turns around, puts in a lawsuit against them, and then tells police, you need to protect me because my life is in danger because I've exposed them by putting in this lawsuit. Now remember, this is he had served as president of the cult from 1925 to 1927 and used the title Hereafter and Now. Yes, separately. You could call him either Hereafter or you could call him Now. And he claimed fear for his life is what kept him in the position. During those years, he paid $4,000 to purchase 600 sacred chickens, which could only be imported from Europe, and a sacrificial truck for the sect. So in other words, they make him president, they call him Hereafter and Now, but for that he spent $4,000, which, by the way, remember, this is 1925 to 27. $4,000 is a considerable amount of money to buy 600 sacred chickens and a sacrificial truck. Now, Clifford Dabney wasn't the only one to sacrifice their vehicles. Other devotees were instructed to leave their automobiles to rust on the compound's grounds to signal their loyalty. Animal sacrifices were also thought to take place there. In other words, this lady, this reverend, she would make you, like, to make sure that you were loyal to her and to the cult. She would make you give up your things. Just leave it there, whatever the worth was of it. Now, Mrs. Blackburn and her daughter convinced Dabney to give them the money for building a printing plant, which would allow them to produce a book revealing the location of rich mines and jewel troves. Here we go with the treasures theme. Now, according to the women, these were instructions, because remember, they pick up Otis, Reverend May and her daughter. They pick them up, and they tell police that these are instructions given to them by Angel Gabriel. And they told him, they tell this gentleman, Dabney, that the solar system threatened his family if he didn't give the money to publish the book titled The Sixth Seal. The construction of the printing plant never took place. In total, he gave them $40,000 and a 164-acre property in Simi Valley that later the press dubbed Harmony Hamlet. So I guess after $40,000 and the printing press was when this guy went forward and he placed that complaint against them. Eventually, more members filed theft charges against May Blackburn. In total, they gave her approximately $50,000. Now, a week later, the Los Angeles investigators sought the burial grounds of the Divine Order of the Royal Arm of the Great 11. This is the name of the cult. This was the cult the Rhodes belonged to, and based on a tip given by a former member, their cemetery was located at Big Bear Lake. Now, missing members of the cult were being sought. Two were men who at one time were married to Ruth Wyland: Edgar Jack Rickenbach in 1919 and Samuel Rizzio in 1924. Sam disappeared after a fight with Ruth. So here, the Reverend's daughter, her husbands are disappearing. Others were Addie McGuffin, Catherine Volz, Barbara Jeffrey, Floyd Stephan, his wife Phoebe, and their 2 daughters. Other deaths which came to the authorities' attention were Frances Turner, 30, reported to have been baked in a stone oven to cure her of a strange blood malady. So, forget that I'm praying over you thing. We're going to bake you. Now, another mysterious death under investigation involved Harleen Satoris, age 20. The day before police set out to find the cult's graveyard, they received a letter from Harleen's parents, who lived in Oregon. They were as mystified as the police about the death of their daughter. They said it occurred when she was at the cult camp in the Santa Susana Hills. Her death certificate was signed several days after she died. She suffered from medical and mental issues, and once released from an asylum in Oregon, she ended up as a devotee of May Otis Blackburn. Mr. Satoris stated in the letter, our daughter did not join any cult. She went to California in the hopes that she would be restored to health from a nervous breakdown and weakness of the heart. She passed away from heart disease and had the services of a regular doctor who resides in Moore Park. We have a deed to a lot in Ivy Lawn Cemetery, Ventura, where she's buried. I spent some time investigating the authenticity of The Sixth Cell, the book which Mrs. Blackburn asserts was dictated to her by an angel and will explain the mysteries of life and death, but came away mystified. We did not live with the so-called colony, but had our own cabin away from the rest while trying to get information as to when the printing plant would be completed. What this sounds like is that not only was this lady, her parents went down there and they were being pumped for money, and they just weren't sure, but they looked like they were about to join the cult. Pending the outcome of the coroner's report, Willa's parents, along with May Otis Blackburn and her daughter, Ruth Wyland Rizzio, were held in custody facing 15 counts of grand theft. After the hearing, the police released Ruth Wyland and charged her mother with 12 counts. Ruth, in a weird departure from reality, complained the 600 chickens only laid 6 eggs per day. These are the 600 sacred chickens. The following day, the homicide squad released Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, claiming they could find no proof to refute their claim that Willa died from an infected tooth. The county coroner test failed to find a trace of poison. Mrs. Rhodes demanded the return of Willa's body as well as the 7 dogs. The request was denied since the girls' remains were still being tested and the dogs would be cremated. Now, that tells you, I can understand what she's saying. I want my adopted daughter's body back, but I want the bodies of 7 puppies. That gives you a good insight into what's going on in their brain, or lack thereof. Okay, May Blackburn testified she was aware the couple kept Willa's body on ice for 16 months and then buried it. There were daily ice deliveries made to the house to stop decomposition from setting in. The body was moved during 3 residence changes. She denied she promised the girl could be resurrected. A former member, Jenny Toy, told the district attorney she met Mrs. Blackburn in Oregon in 1922. They showed her a worn-out Bible, maps, and other stuff. She and her husband moved into the Blackburns' home, where her husband was prohibited from working. She was a stout woman who was given the name of Speed and Swiftness. You know, and you always think, were they being like tongue-in-cheek, like, you're stout. Stout is another word for fat. Okay, we're going to give you the name of Speed and Swiftness. What do you think, Henry? That sounds like something you would do if you had a cult. But anyway.
No, this sounds more like a little bit like Jimmy Jones. They don't talk about them drinking the Kool-Aid.
No. My point is, you get a member and she's stout, but you're gonna give her the.
Look, there's an endless amount of names. Chunky.
No, but that's my point. They go the opposite. They give her the official name of Swift, and I'm thinking, were they trying to make fun of her, like, or I don't know.
I'm not fat. I'm fluffy.
No, she's stout. That's what they called it, stout. But instead, they call her, what was it? Swiftness and speed. There we go.
What they mean by that is slow.
Okay. Whatever. Maybe they did it to make her happy and she'd give them more money. Anyway, she confirmed they all carried out Queen May's weird instructions because they feared for their lives. Now, a Beverly Hills automobile dealer testified a girl cultist was forced from his car at gunpoint by cult members after she told him she wanted to escape and was in fear of her life. Merritt Wodell, known as King of Peace, by the way, everybody in this cult got some type of title, unusual titles, by the way, described how he was shot in the heel by instructions of Queen May when she issued a divine order, and not by mistake as claimed by other members. So in other words, she's meting out punishment. You know, you're lucky I just shot you in the heel this time. Next time, watch out. Walter and Jenny, or Grandmother Blackburn, were brought in to testify. Jenny was May's mother, and she married Walter Blackburn in 1913 in Oregon. It was through them May met her husband, Ward Blackburn, who was Walter's son. He was 20 years younger than her, and the couple married on January 11th, 1924. So basically, she marries their stepbrother, and he marries his stepsister, and he's 20 years younger than her. Now, Jenny, her mom, 65, was known in the cult as Queen of the Scale. She told authorities how she was chained willingly to her bed for 2 months in a house on Wilshire Boulevard. She did this to establish a point or to complete a religious constellation. According to the older woman, the angel Gabriel finally released me, that is spiritually. By concord of the musical scales made it necessary for me to remain where I was at my point until the angel Gabriel told mother, my daughter, to release me, end quote. At the same time, Ward Blackburn, known as the King of the North Star of the Grand Central Point, acted as the weatherman, quote unquote. This is her, the stepfather, the Reverend stepfather. He told authorities, quote, when we lived on Wilshire Boulevard, I counted all the cars and made a report to my wife. When we moved into the Susanna Hills, I counted the trains. I'm sorry, this is not her stepfather. This is her husband. When we moved into the Susanna Hills, I counted the trains. When the weather was clear, well, it was clear, and I made a record of it. When it rained, I put out a coffee can and measured the water when the storm was over. He was an unusual character with 5-inch nails who sported a Chinese mandarin's mustache. I'm telling you, it's incredible. Now, these orders were carried out at the behest of Mother Blackburn, who claimed she received instructions from the angel Gabriel. Walter Blackburn, okay, this is her stepdad, 71, told of marrying Jenny after his wife died. The newspapers noted May Otis Blackburn, 48, and her husband, Ward, 29, are stepbrother and stepsister. Despite the fact that they were unrelated, it brought to light the age difference between them and cast an incestuous pall over the union. During those days, the 40 remaining members of the cult moved to the Hill Camp. It was evident they expected to be summoned by the district attorney. Perhaps they anticipated his next line of investigation would be the disappearance of Sammy Rizzio, after he allegedly struck his wife, who was considered a messenger. Instead of explaining what happened to her husband, Ruth Rizzio told authorities his true surname was Scarletta, but he did not use it because his family fled Chicago to avoid trouble. Here we go. Frankie Rizzio, Sammy's brother, told police shortly after his brother's disappearance. Ruth produced a letter supposedly written by her husband explaining why he left. He suspected it was a forgery, and he offered to work as a chauffeur for the cult in order to investigate his brother's fate. Several days later, Sammy's traveling bag was found. Despite the story given, he took his belongings with him when he left. The Rizzios threatened to go to the police, but May Otis Blackburn probably knew they hid their own sordid past, and which they feared would be revived. Sam served 9 months as a juvenile for altering checks, and his father had been wanted in connection to a triple murder. It appeared it was involved with a Black Hand in Chicago. So, all right. Before the arrest of May Blackburn and her daughter, Frank Rizzio noticed the disappearance of Willow Rhodes. He was told she went to Altadena to teach. Other members said she headed east to get married. None told them she died and was buried under her parents' home. The Rizzio's threats were never acted upon, but 4 years after their son's disappearance, they got their chance to air their misgivings to the DA when May and Ruth were arrested. So here, Sammy, okay, marries Reverend Blackburn's daughter, and all of a sudden he disappears. And they're thinking, oh, he hit her, but it's more like she started asking, what happened? Where's Willa? Where's Willa? You guys told me she was, but where's Willa? Next thing you know, he disappears. His brother gets into the group and plays a chauffeur, and he's trying to find out what happened to my brother. And they find like his bag, and it's like, okay, this guy, the story they're giving me is not what it is. And of course, the Blackburns, they're telling when his parents come around, and apparently they, when he married, he told his wife, hey, my real last name is Scarletta and blah, blah, blah. So the good reverend, when they're coming around saying, hey, we need to know where our son is, she's like, you better be quiet and go back to Chicago, because if not, I'm going to tell him about who you really are. Just remember, we're talking here triple murder in the Black Hand, which is a mafia thing. So fast forward, I guess they go back home and say, no, we can't say anything. So they get their chance 4 years later, because now, guess what? Otis, May Blackburn, and her daughter have been arrested. So 2 letters allegedly written by Sammy Rizzio were reviewed by handwriting analysts. One had the same misspellings as Ruth's writing, and one sent to his mother was written by a right-handed person, and Sam was left-handed, which proved that the 2 letters that supposedly he had sent his parents were fake, and they were done by his wife. Among those questions was a cult member who agreed to provide information if they hid her identity. She led the authorities to the sex cemetery. She was a pharmacist and said Mrs. Blackburn came to her to obtain poison. May said the angel Gabriel wanted her to kill Sam with a poison, quote, which cannot be detected in the body of a drowned man, end quote. When the woman expressed doubts, she was told he would be resurrected after the publication of the 6th seal. The pharmacist told police that despite May's assurance, she gave her a vial of colored water. The authorities wondered if the pharmacist lied in order to protect herself from blame. She said May obtained chloroform, and tests made on the dogs buried next to Willa Rhodes confirmed his chemical was used on them. So, in other words, she chloroformed the puppies to test them, and sure enough, they did find that. In 1925, in Topanga Canyon, Sam Rizzio, deep in the grip of the cult, this is before he disappears, by the way, deep in the grip of the cult, danced like a dervish in sand sprinkled with a powerful poison. He did this 10 times in order to, quote, rid himself of another belief that prevented him from accepting his concord in the Great 11, end quote. His belief in Catholicism, according to May Blackburn, was the barrier. On October 10th, May claimed Angel Michael visited her. She described him as a handsome man with long black hair. She declared, all these trials and tribulations are just to test our loyalty to the faith. Michael exhorted Ruth and me to keep steadfast, and we will. He was only with us a little while, but he explained all the troubles would be cleared, and then he smiled and disappeared. Based on Dabney Clifford's suit, the Ventura County deputy seized the Lord's furniture set from the Santa Susana headquarters, which was valued at $20,000. By the way, they had a golden throne there. Again, remember, $20,000 in the 1920s is, again, a lot of money.
It's like 120 now.
Oh, a lot. They had all this furniture in there, which tells you how much money they were getting out of the followers some other way. Another piece of the puzzle regarding the cult's activities came when George Jeffrey wired police to help find his missing daughter, who he claimed his divorced wife took into the sect without permission of the Oregon courts. Another man, Carl Osborne, once engaged to Ruth Rizzio, told police she'd been a dance hall girl, but the disturbing part of his story involved the disappearance of a woman known only as Mrs. McGuffin. He said she'd been missing since he joined the cult several years before and was the widow of an oil operator living in the area. The investigation confirmed that some members were deeper in the operation of the cult than others. Gail Cond, who acted as a secretary for May Blackburn, copied down the messages she received while in trance, which were how the contents of the 6th seal manuscript were produced. Finally, during the trial, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes confessed that in November 1924, May Blackburn brought them down from Portland. She told them Willa was one of 11 queens who would rule the world from Hollywood. Upon the girl's arrival, she was gifted with 7 puppies, the same ones sacrificed next to her. On Christmas Day, she developed a tooth infection that, without medical attention, killed her on New Year's Day. The promised day of Willa's resurrection came and went, and then the cult leader told her parents she'd been sacrificed to save the world. This statement, coupled together with the invitation of her parents to come to Los Angeles, the gift of the dogs, her sudden illness and her death on the portentous date of New Year's Day, suggested these events were planned. However, they were only circumstantial, and the district attorney could not prove Willa was murdered. Was there a connection between Willa and Sam's death? They were very close in age, and both disappeared within months of each other. During the proceedings, it became known Mrs. Rhodes had an adult daughter, Mrs. Richter, wife of a San Francisco attorney. When police arrived to question them, they were told the couple were spending 2 weeks in New York. Mrs. Richter said she had not seen her mother for several years, but they corresponded regularly. Had someone tipped them off so they would be conveniently out of town and unable to answer questions? Which is another question. They supposedly adopt this girl, Willa Rhodes, when she's 2 years old. But this is, which they had, by the way, they had 2 daughters who by that time were adults. So they adopted, so supposedly, but there's a big mystery where they got this little girl from. When they're older. Supposedly when they're 2. This is what they're saying. Nobody really knows how old she really was. And then, apparently they were already in touch with this Otis lady, Blackburn, whatever. And that's when she tells them, bring her down to LA on this date and on this date, on this date, which is why they're thinking this was just, there was more of, there's some type of planning involved in all of this. They had children. They had 2 adult daughters. So, and I'm thinking that daughter and her husband, they didn't want to be around to be asked questions they didn't want to answer. So more people came forward to speak of the adult cult's activities. They described ecstatic dancing in the nude over the graves of 2 slaughtered mules. This occurred out in the desert at Death Valley by the instruction of May Otis Blackburn to, quote, represent the passing from death to eternal life, end quote. Okay. All right, you got to dance over the dead mules. I don't know what to tell you on that.
Yeah, but you can't dance over until it starts rotting.
Oh, be quiet. During the day, the cult members worked at tomato packing sheds and turned over their paychecks to Queen May. The main building at the colony was called the Church of the Divine Science of Joshua, the branch of the headstone of the corner. Florida Dingman, a member, cared for a 2-year-old child named as Baby Jehovah, who was expected to become the second Messiah. A 500-pound gilded Christ chair with the head of a dog was made to await his arrival. Let me interject here. They never say where. They never say Baby Jehovah was a baby born of any of the members. You never know where did Baby Jehovah come from, this little boy. That for you watching the slides, you've seen pictures of him sitting on a lady's lap. Did they kidnap this kid? Where did they get this little baby from? Because they never said a so-and-so had a child and they named, one of the members. No. All of a sudden they have this little boy, which I have a feeling that if this wouldn't have happened, he would have ended getting sacrificed as well. That's what I think. But anyway, a 500-pound, with the head of a dog was made to await his arrival. I'm telling you, these people, there was a lot of money floating around there because, of course, they're all working for Mother May or whatever her name. On October 22nd, Willow was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery. The autopsy surgeon reported the girl died of natural causes. By Halloween, May Blackburn posted a $10,000 bail and was set free. In December, 26 persons from Ventura County were presented with subpoenas to testify in court. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and in March 1930, she was found guilty of 8 counts of grand theft. She was sentenced to 1 to 10 years on each count to be run concurrently at San Quentin Penitentiary. In June, the cult's household goods were sold at auction. A gold leaf bedroom set supposed to have cost $6,000 sold for only a few $100s. In December 1931, now remember folks, that's another thing I want you to remember. 1920, 1930, the Depression has hit the United States, okay? Nobody has money, but these people have gold furniture. The rest of the country is on its head. Remember, October 1929, the crash, even though the economy had already been slowing down, nobody had a job. There's a million economic problems. And of course, this is why that $6,000 bedroom set only sells for a few hundreds, because nobody has any money. All right, we're talking here a year or less, more or less, give or take, from the stock market crash. All right, so in December 1931, the California Supreme Court granted May Otis Blackburn a new trial. They held the first trial invalid because testimony dealing with activities of the Great 11 cult was admitted when it should have been confined to the book, The Sixth Seal, alone. In May 1932, the state dropped the charges against May Otis Blackburn, and by the end of the year, she was once again presiding as priestess over the cult. They positioned the guard at the entrance to their Santa Susana compound, and the sect members were also armed. Eventually, they relocated to the Lake Tahoe area. In 1935, 3,400 acres, which included the area once used by the Church of Divine Signs of Joshua, was offered to Ventura County as a site for a new penitentiary. Abandoned buildings still dotted the area, and in 1939, the compound burned to the ground. William and Martha Rhodes, Willa's adoptive parents, both passed away in 1944. May Otis Blackburn died on June 17, 1951, in Los Angeles from heart disease. Records indicate her birth name varied from Matilda May Otis to Matilda Jane Otis. In the 1920 census, she lived with her daughter Ruth and her son-in-law, Edgar Rickenbach, in Los Angeles. She listed herself as May O. Holmes. In 1919, Ruth married Edgar Rickenbacher. On May 24, 1924, she married Samuel Rizzio, 18, at the First Christian Church in Santa Ana. Strangely enough, the bride's birth date kept changing on the marriage records, making her younger than her husband's, when in truth she was a few years older than each of them. Ruth Angeline Rickenbach Rizzio Williams, nee Wayland, this was her real name, by the way. Her name at the moment of her death, passed away in December 1978 in Sacramento. Ward Sitten Blackburn, her stepfather, died on June 24, 1975 in Los Angeles. Addie McGuffin, who was reported as missing when she belonged to the group, rejoined in the 1930s. Supposedly, she was tasked with secreting away the copy of the Sixth Seal. She died in 1946. The seed of what became known as the Blackburn cult sprang not from mystic insight, but from desperation after a failed film career. Mother and daughter starred and produced the film A Nugget in the Rough in 1917 while living in Portland, Oregon. They moved to Los Angeles in 1918, but 4 years later, Ruth supported them, working as a taxi dancer, many of who also prostituted themselves. In retrospect, May Blackburn may not have predicted Daphne Clifford would go to the police, but she knew eventually someone else would, or authorities would question where she got her money from. In February 1925, 4 years before the discovery of Willa's grave, at a construction site in Topanga Canyon, a metal box was plowed up. It contained a dozen love letters between Oregon lumber king Fremont Everett, a married man, and May Otis Blackburn. The letters detailed an affair that reached its height from 1917 to 1918. Another letter stated, quote, that for value received, I have given you notes amounting to $25 amounts to $25,400, and I solemnly promise and agree not to sell, bargain, or convey the bulk of my property until I have paid you or settled to your entire satisfaction. In total, according to the letters, May received $100,000 from him. Inside the box were several snapshots the district attorney presumed were May and Everett. It was apparent he was adverse to having his picture taken and tried to hide his face, while the woman made sure her identity was unmistakable. There were copies of the photographs inside as well. The wording of the letters written by Everett plainly indicated a great deal of infatuation with the object of his affection. Fremont Everett denied he ever wrote the love letters to May Otis Wyland, the name she used then. He said he knew her only through business deals when purchasing property from her, which is why some were written on his company stationery. Mr. Everett was a small-framed 60-year-old man, and his associates vouched he was not the type to get mixed up in a sordid love triangle. When May was asked about the contents of the small box, she admitted to the affair and said she buried the box after Fremont refused to leave his wife and then dug it up herself. Was this a publicity stunt concocted by May to explain where her money was coming from? Some believe May did have an affair with Fremont, but did so intentionally in order to blackmail him and also falsify some of the letters. The language was stilted, much like Sam's letters. There was also repeated references to numerology, a major concern of the cult. There were other circumstantial incidents pointing to darker deeds than defrauding gullible followers of money. In 1928, May took 9 of the group to the desolate desert landscape of Stovepipe Wells and Death Valley. Later, police investigated to see if Sam's body was disposed of inside one of the wells. A few months later, May instructed Willa's father to bury a large trunk at Big Bear Lake. She never told him what was inside. The police tried to find the trunk and verify if Sam Rizzio was inside, but they could not locate it. Sam Rizzio's whereabouts remained unknown, and his family never heard from him again. If killed, is he buried somewhere in Tobanga Canyon, Big Bear, or in a well at Death Valley? Like him, the dead woman found freshly thawed. Okay, that was another story before that. But anyway, bottom line, May got away with it. She got a new trial. She got off scot-free. And they kind of broke up the cult because they had to move around, and they had 3,200 acres. That tells you the extent. Gold furniture. Okay, this is not like 3 people, getting around. And it begs a question that people, are they gullible? Or, for those of you who have seen the slides, this lady was nothing unusual about her, to look at her. All right? And to the point was, were these people willing to sacrifice their child, like Willa Rhodes? And she's telling them, I'm going to resurrect her? What do you think, Henry? What do you think of this story?
Unfortunately, there's a nut born every minute. And
wow.
And unfortunately, a lot of people are very innocent and they want to believe in something, and they're very easily taken advantage.
Yeah, they're willing to believe stuff that, to us, we hear it and we're like, you got to be kidding! You believe that? This lady is basically saying she's a messenger from the angels, and that they're giving her all this information, and that's not the case. It turns out that she's like she's defrauding them. Plus it looks like she might have even had people murdered. What do you think? Do you think that guy Sam Rizzio, that he disappeared and?
Oh no, he's like that mobster under somebody's house.
Who?
He's like that mobster that disappeared in the 70s. He's under somebody's house.
Well, but I guess my point is, his family leaves Chicago because they're involved in this mafia thing and the triple murder, and they run into this lady who's deadlier than the mafia and the Black Hand in Chicago. She's worse. She goes away with him. Because it seemed, and now it makes you wonder, did he not ask about Willa? What if he was involved with Willa? Or he was like, because remember, he's 18 and she's 16. And maybe they're seeing, and I guarantee you, they're thinking, virgin, we need a virgin, and the 7 puppies, and, hey, Sam, you hit my daughter, supposedly. And now, guess what? We're going to get rid of you because you might have, who knows? What we would consider is like, is that a motive? It turned out to be a motive. That's my point.
A lot of the times they will trust a 16-year-old. You don't expect a 16-year-old, especially if she look kind of cute, to be.
No, she's pretty. She's a pretty girl.
To be doing stuff like that. And it's, again, like, people are very innocent and very gullible, and they want to believe in something, so it becomes like Jim Jones. Everybody wants to drink the Kool-Aid.
No, they don't want to drink that. That was the whole problem. They didn't want to drink the Kool-Aid, but they were made to drink the Kool-Aid.
Not in the literal sense, but they want to be part of something. Unfortunately, it's not the right part.
Yes. So there, anyway, that's part of Mardi Gras, 2025, you guys. We went down we did a little bit of Mardi Gras. We threw in some cult stuff in there, okay, but yeah, all the stuff happened about 100 years ago. All right. And you think, well, people that gullible, and even nowadays, yes, people are that gullible. Ooh, how's this? It's especially when people, whether it's a man or a woman. Obviously, this is a woman. She portrays herself like she's got a special connection to God and the angels and all this stuff. And the next thing you know, she's and I, in part, I'm thinking some of those members that did leave and then come back, or were saying we were afraid. Can you imagine your part when you're knee deep in this cult and you're seeing she's getting rid of people, or so and so that was here, and the next day no, they've disappeared. So all of a sudden you start, if you're starting to have any doubts, you're thinking, man, if I ever say anything or question anything, I might be the next one to go. And again, the people she was involved with, that guy, that Dabney guy, he was not. This was not some poor literate slob that is like, oh, no wonder he believed that. A lot of these people had some type of education and money. Like there was no.
See, it all comes down to if you could do this,
yeah,
you get this.
Of course, you do this, you get this. Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this this Mardi Gras 2025, and I'll see you guys. What's the next thing we'll do? Well, I don't know. We'll come up with something. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, be good. All right? Be good until Easter. And then you can, that's it. Today's the last hurrah. Until next time, take care.